Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered above me with my on-screen display showing some of my system information, and then to the right-hand side we have my hardware monitoring window with the same system information in it. These are two separate ways that you can monitor the performance of your computer and have them visible to you in real time. I'm going to go through and show you how I've set this up. To do this, we're going to use MSI Afterburner, which is open in the top right corner. So it goes without saying, but make sure you've already installed that if you're looking to follow along. During the installation, it'll ask you, do you want to install Rivia Tuner? Say yes to this if you're planning to use the on-screen display, as that is how it accomplishes it. If the hardware monitor for you here is enough, then you can say no to installing Rivia Tuner. So how do we actually open these up so that you can see them once you've installed Afterburner? Well, in the Afterburner window here, if you come down, you can click the bottom left corner option. This will show and hide your hardware monitoring window. As for the on-screen display above me, this is done through Rivia Tuner. So if I come down into my system tray down here, I'll find the Rivia Tuner icon. It looks like a little computer monitor. Click and open up that, and you can see in the top of this screen there is show on-screen display. So I can toggle that off and it'll disappear for me, and I can turn it back on. And while we're in this window, I'll cover off a couple of these options. So if we come down, you can see there's display on-screen display fill is turned on for me. If I turn this off, it gets rid of the black background that is around my stats. Below that is the color palette. That is self-explanatory. I'm sure I don't need to go into that one. And below that is the on-screen display zoom. This controls the size of your on-screen display. Obviously, when you're playing a game, you don't want it to take up your entire display, so you would have it set pretty small. But for the sake of this video, I'll just leave it large. And below this, we've got the ability to control which corner of your game it shows the on-screen display, because depending on your HUD elements, you may want to have it in a different spot. And below that, you can do some fine tweaking, and you can move it very specifically per pixel to put it exactly where you want it on the screen if you are into doing that for whatever reason. So we've shown how to open up the hardware monitor. We now know how to toggle the on-screen display and customize its look. But what if we want to toggle the on-screen display but not have to go into Rivia Tuner every single time to do that? Well, jump back into MSI Afterburner and then click the settings button above the toggle switch we used earlier, and then go into the on-screen display tab. And in here, there's a couple of different options. So we're mainly going to focus on the top one, which is toggle on-screen display. Now mine is already set to control and comma, control plus comma. So if I close this down and I hold down control on my keyboard and press the comma, you can see it does the same thing. It's just toggling my on-screen display off or on. So if I have a full screen game up and maybe I'm stuttering or something weird's happening, or the fans in my computer or laptop ramp up, then at any point I can just toggle this on and say, oh yeah, look at that. You know, I'm pulling more power, my GPU is getting too hot, and that's why my computer is now loud. So what we're going to do, let me jump back into that and go back into the on-screen display. Just below it is show system time. If you highlight that and click apply, you will add in the time and put that in your on-screen display. Depending, if you're streaming or something, that might be useful. I'll turn that off because I don't need that. And then below that is show on-screen display on captured screenshots or videos. That, again, pretty self-explanatory. But if you are into capturing screenshots and recording videos, this will just make sure that this is removed and isn't present in that recording. Great. So we now know how to open everything, and we know how to customize the look. So the last bit is, how do we actually change the individual stats that are being tracked? Because there's a lot more information that we could be showing. Maybe I want to see, my frame rate, or maybe I want to see more CPU information. So to add and remove things from the overlay and from your hardware monitor, go back into MSI Afterburner, open up the settings again, and click on the monitoring tab this time. And in here is how you can control all the different options you see. So I'll go through these one at a time. The first one is hardware polling period in milliseconds. This is what controls the frequency that each stat that you're tracking updates. Now, by default, out of box, it's set to 1,000 milliseconds. So that's 1 second. So every second it'll update. As an example, if I set it to 100, it'll update 10 times per second and click apply. And now you can see that both my graph down here is now flying across and my overlay here is now updating all its numbers really quick. But I don't need to see that 100 times, 10 times a second, 100 milliseconds. So I'm going to put it back to 1000 and click apply. Now, below this is the GPU usage, GPU temperature. You can see that these are already ticked and enabled and are being tracked. But let's scroll down and see what other options we have. Let me go down to, we have GPU core clock, that's enabled. GPU 1 memory clock. That would be good to see because right now I'm only checking my memory usage. But maybe I want to see my memory clock from my GPU, in which case I would highlight it and then tick the little tick next to it and then click apply. Now you can see in my graph down here, it has added GPU 1 memory clock and it is now being tracked and it will slowly move across as it updates over time. And in the on-screen display up here, you can see it is now showing my memory clock speed as well. If it doesn't show in the on-screen display for you, there is a little checkbox here that says show in on-screen display, so you could turn that off or on based on whatever you want. So maybe you have this monitoring window open on a second screen showing you a lot of detailed information, but maybe for your on-screen display, you only want to see a small amount of information like frame rate. So you could technically enable everything you need in here and then only use show an on-screen display for the very specific things that you want to just be able to glance at quickly. Cool. Let me go through. So we'll track that. Let's track GPU 1 power. We'll track GPU 1 fan speed as well. We've got CPU. What CPU options do we have? We have CPU temperature. Where's CPU usage? I want to track that as well. And then click apply. Cool. So you can see a bunch more options have now shown up. I can now see my power. I can see my CPU usage. You will note, actually, let me go back up the top. There is GPU 1 and then there is also GPU 2. GPU 1 is your primary. That's whatever, your screen's connected to. GPU 2, my CPU, has an integrated GPU. So if my graphics card dies, I can connect my monitor to my motherboard directly. That is what GPU 2 is. So if your CPU does have an integrated GPU, then that's what that is. You don't need to track that in the majority of situations. You wouldn't need to track both. So just track whatever your primary GPU is. I'll also go all the way down the bottom because down the bottom is frame rate and frame time. So I'm going to enable both of those as well. And you'll see those pop up in the overlay. So it will show you whatever API the game is running. So you can see for Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, it's using DirectX 12. If you open up a Vulkan game, it'll just say Vulkan here, or DirectX 10, 11, whatever the API is that the game uses. Cool. Alrighty, so we have that is how we enable and disable different options in both of our graph and in our on-screen overlay. Right. Let's say you only have one screen, but you want to see the graph information in your on-screen overlay. So let me go back up and let's use we use frame rate actually as an example. So I'm going to highlight this option, and now next to where it says show in on-screen display, you'll have an option here that says text. You can change this to graph or text graph. If you change it to graph and we click apply, you can there see my frame rate has now dropped down out of the DirectX 12 row here, and it's now in its own graph row. And this will now go across and it will record everything in here and it'll spike up and down. So if I click into the Horizon window, you can see there it's shut up because I'm now interacting with this window. Cool, so I'll click back out of it and it can drop back down again. I'm going to go back to text though because that is way too much information, and I do have another screen that I can stick my performance monitoring window on. The next thing is the performance monitoring window. You can see we've enabled a bunch more options, but I can only see if my window, if I left it this size, I've got a scroll bar now to go down and see all my other options because I've enabled a lot of information to track. But maybe my second screen's only 1080p and maybe I'm tracking 30 different things in here. that's where the graph columns section comes into it. See, now I've got mine set to 2 because that's what I like. By default, from memory, I'm pretty sure this is set to 1. So your monitor will probably look like this, where you only have one column and you have a big long scroll wheel to go through. You can set this to as many columns as you like. So if I set it to 4, for example, you can see it's now split and I no longer have a scroll wheel because it's made a bunch smaller graphs. Cool, alrighty. The only other thing in here that's worth mentioning, 2 other things, I lied, is a show in tray icon. This isn't for everybody, but I personally use this for my CPU. I like to be able to see my CPU temperature at a glance. So you can see down here, I've got it enabled already. I've got CPU package and it shows my CPU temperatures. But as an example, it says frame rate and I've got that highlighted. So let's tick show in tray icon and click apply. Now if I come down to my system tray down here and we open this, you'll see there is now a number here. So I can click and drag this and I'm going to put it next to my CPU temperature. And there you go. It's now going to show you my frame rate in my system tray down there. And you can customize the color and other information if you like, but I don't really need that, so we can get rid of that now. The only other thing I think we've got to cover is, where's a good example of this? GPU core clock. Where's GPU core clock? This option here, GPU core clock. In the graph, you can see it has a limit of 3000 as graph limits here. That is actually set by me. By default, this was set to 2500, and my current core clock is 2505. So if you set it and apply it like that, you can see it's just going to max out the graph. But what happens if your clock speed, goes to 2800? You're not going to see that representative in the graph. Having a graph is almost pointless if you can hit 100%. So I've swapped mine to 3000. So if you come across anything in here where you're monitoring your stats and it's locked at the highest peak, you would change the graph limits in here. And the minimum graph limit, it does support negatives. So I don't know, if you happen to be doing LN2 cooling or something like that and you're dropping your CPU and GPU temperatures lower than 0, you can change the graph limit to reflect that so you can still track the temperature moving up and down. Cool. All right. I think that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you've got any comments or anything below. I will reply to you as soon as I can. Thanks.